In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a charming stranger, Lionel Grey, stirs up trouble at the annual fete, hunting for a lost sapphire tied to a decades-old secret. When he's found stabbed in the vicarage garden, Miss Marple's sharp eyes spot clues, others miss a cryptic notebook, a rusty key, a hidden locket, as whispers of a vanished heiress. Clara Weston, surface. Miss Marple unravels a web of greed and lies, setting a trap to catch the killer. In a thrilling showdown at the old well, she uncovers the sapphire and a shocking truth, proving no secret can hide from her clever mind. Chapter 1. The Fate at St. Mary. Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly. The morning sun poured through the lace curtains, painting the room with golden light. From her armchair by the window, she could see the village green of St. Mary Mead buzzing with life. The annual fete was in full swing, and the air carried the sweet smell of fresh scones, the laughter of children, and the hum of cheerful chatter. Stalls lined the green, offering homemade jams, knitted scarves, and games for the little ones. It was the kind of day that made the village feel alive, warm, and full of promise. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the crowd. She knew every face in St. Mary, old Mrs. Baker selling her famous lemon tarts, young Tommy chasing his dog through the grass, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, bustling about with his usual nervous energy. But today there was a stranger among them. A tall man with slicked back hair and a flashy suit stood near the cake stall, chatting with folks as if he'd known them forever. His smile was wide, but Miss Marple noticed something off about it. It didn't reach his eyes. She didn't like that. People with smiles like that often hid something. "That's Mr. Lionel Grey," said Mrs. Dane, Miss Marple's neighbour, who'd popped in for a cup of tea earlier. "Came to town yesterday, staying at the Blue Boar Inn. Says he's writing a book about old villages. Very charming, but a bit nosy, if you ask me." Mrs. Dane had a knack for gossip, and Miss Marple listened quietly, storing every word. Nosy strangers in St. Mary Mead often meant trouble. She'd seen it before, folks poking into things that didn't concern them, stirring up secrets best left buried. Miss Marple adjusted her glasses and watched Mr. Grey move through the crowd. He stopped by the vicarage stall, where Mr. Clement was selling old books to raise money for the church. The vicar's face turned red as Grey leaned close, talking fast and waving his hands. Miss Marple couldn't hear the words, but she knew an argument when she saw one. Mr. Clement's shoulders stiffened, and he shook his head sharply. Grey stepped back, his smile gone, replaced by a hard look. Then he turned and walked toward the tea tent, leaving the vicar staring after him. "Something's not right," Miss Marple murmured to herself, her needles pausing. She didn't like the way Grey moved, all smooth and confident, like a cat stalking a bird. She'd seen men like him before, charming on the outside, but with hearts full of secrets. Her mind wandered to a story from years ago about a man who came to St. Mary Mead pretending to be a painter. He'd turned out to be a thief, stealing silver from half the village before Miss Marple's quiet questions caught him out. She wondered what Mr. Grey was after. The fete carried on, bright and noisy. Children ran with balloons, and the band played a cheerful tune. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving the green. She noticed Mrs. Price, the vicar's housekeeper, hovering near the vicarage stall. Mrs. Price was a thin woman with nervous hands, always fussing with her apron. Today she looked more jittery than usual, her eyes darting toward Mr. Grey as he laughed with Miss Eleanor, a young woman who'd arrived at the fete with him. Miss Eleanor was pretty, with dark curls and a fancy dress that didn't quite fit the village's simple ways. She clung to Gray's arm, but her smile seemed forced, like she was playing a part. Miss Marple's needles clicked again. She didn't trust people who smiled too much or too little. Miss Eleanor's smile was the too much kind, all teeth and no warmth. Mrs. Price, on the other hand, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Miss Marple filed these thoughts away, knowing small details often led to big truths. She'd learned that from years of watching people, villagers, strangers, anyone who crossed her path. People were like her knitting. Pull one thread, and the whole pattern could unravel. As the afternoon sun dipped low, the fate grew louder. The raffle was announced, and folks crowded around the stage where Mr. Clement stood, holding a basket of prizes. Miss Marple stayed by her window, content to watch from afar. She saw Gray slip away from the tea tent, heading toward the vicarage garden. Mrs. Price followed him, her steps quick and sneaky. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. Something was brewing, and it wasn't just the tea in her cup. She sat, her knitting down, and leaned closer to the window. The vicarage garden was hidden by tall hedges, but she could just make out Gray's flashy suit moving through the gate. Mrs. Price was right behind him, her apron flapping. Then came a shout, and angry. It was Mr. Clement's voice, coming from the garden. Miss Marple stood, her old knees creaking, and grabbed her shawl. She didn't like poking her nose into other people's business, but when voices got that loud, it usually meant trouble. By the time she reached the garden gate, a small crowd had gathered. Mr. Clement stood frozen, his face pale as chalk. Mrs. Price was wringing her hands, tears in her eyes. And there, on the grass near the vicarage's rose bushes, lay Mr. Lionel Gray. He wasn't moving. A shiny letter opener, the kind used for old-fashioned mail, stuck out of his chest. Blood stained his fancy suit, and his eyes stared at the sky, empty and still. "Oh dear," Miss Marple said softly, her sharp mind already turning. Murder in St. Mary Mead wasn't new to her, but it always shocked the village. People gasped and whispered, some backing away, others craning their necks to see. Miss Marple stayed calm, her eyes taking in every detail. The letter opener's silver handle, the way Gray's hand clutched a crumpled piece of paper, the muddy footprints near the body. She noticed Mrs. Price's shoes were clean, but Mr. Clement's boots had a smudge of dirt. Miss Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. "Someone fetch Inspector Craddock," shouted Mr. Dunhill, the local historian, pushing through the crowd. His round face was flushed, and his glasses slipped down his nose. Miss Marple knew him well. He loved old stories and dusty books, but he wasn't fond of strangers like Gray. She wondered if he knew more than he let on. Miss Marple stepped closer, careful not to touch anything. She bent down, her eyes on the paper in Gray's hand. It looked like a page from a notebook, with scribbled words she couldn't quite read. But one word stood out: sapphire. Her mind raced. She'd heard of a sapphire in St. Mary Mead before, tied to a story about a rich girl who vanished long ago. Clara Weston, her name was. Could Gray's death have something to do with that old tale? Inspector Craddock arrived, his face grim. He was a young man, but smart, and he respected Miss Marple's knack for solving puzzles. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "didn't expect to see you here, but I'm glad. What do you make of this?" She gave a small smile, her eyes still on the body. "It's early days, Inspector, but I'd say Mr. Gray was looking for something he shouldn't have. That letter opener from the vicarage, isn't it, Mr. Clement?" The vicar nodded, his hands shaking. Yes, it's mine. Kept it on my desk. But I swear, I didn't know, need to swear, Mr. Clement, Miss Marple said gently. The truth has a way of coming out. She didn't say more, but her mind was busy. The letter opener meant someone close to the vicarage was involved, wanted it to look that way. Mrs. Price, perhaps, or Mr. Clement himself. And where was Miss Eleanor? The inspector's men roped off the garden, and the crowd was shooed away. Miss Marple lingered, watching as they covered Gray's body with a sheet. She noticed a small key on the grass, half hidden by a rosebush. It was old and rusty, not the kind for a modern lock. She pointed it out to Craddock, who bagged it carefully. "Good eye, Miss Marple," he said. "This could be important." She nodded, her thoughts on that word sapphire. If Gray was after Clara Weston's lost jewel, someone might have killed to keep it hidden, or to take it for themselves. Miss Marple knew greed could turn even good folks bad. She'd seen it before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. As the sun set, the fete broke up, its cheer gone. Villagers whispered about murder, their faces pale. Miss Marple walked back toward her cottage, her shawl tight around her shoulders. But she didn't go home. Instead, she turned toward the vicarage, her steps slow but sure. She needed to talk to Mr. Clement and Mrs. Price, and maybe find Miss Eleanor. The truth was out there, hiding in plain sight, just like it always did. She paused at the vicarage gate, looking back at the quiet green. The stalls were empty now, the balloons gone. But Miss Marple felt the weight of the mystery settling over St. Mary Mead. She'd solve it, she knew, she always did. With a small nod to herself, she pushed open the gate and stepped inside, ready to unravel the secrets Mr. Gray had died for. Chapter 2. Shadows of the past. Miss Marple stepped through the vicarage gate, her shoes crunching on the gravel path. The evening air was cool, and the last rays of sunlight painted the vicarage's old stone walls with a soft glow. The fate's cheerful noise was gone, replaced by a heavy quiet that hung over St. Mary Mead. Mr. Lionel Gray's body still lay in the garden, covered now, but Miss Marple could feel the weight of his death like a storm cloud. She tightened her shawl and knocked on the vicarage door, her sharp eyes scanning the windows for movement. Mrs. Price, the housekeeper, opened the door. Her face was pale, and her hands twisted her apron into knots. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice shaky. "It's awful, just awful. Come in, please." She stepped aside, and Miss Marple entered the dim hallway. The vicarage smelled of polished wood and lavender, but tonight there was a faint whiff of fear. "Is Mr. Clement here?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but firm. She noticed Mrs. Price's eyes dart toward the study door, then back to her. The housekeeper nodded and led the way, her steps quick and nervous. Miss Marple followed, her mind already turning over. The day's events, Gray's argument with the vicar, the letter opener in his chest, the word sapphire scrawled in his notebook. She'd seen murder before, and it always started with small things, looks, words, secrets that grew too big to hide. The vicar's study was warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth. Mr. Clement sat at his desk, his head in his hands. Papers were scattered around him, and the spot where the letter opener usually sat was empty. Inspector Craddock stood by the window, his notebook open, his pen scratching notes. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, giving her a small nod. "Miss Marple," he said, "I was hoping you'd come. This is a nasty business." "Indeed it is, Inspector," she replied, settling into a chair Mrs. Price offered. She looked at the vicar, whose face was grey with worry. "Mr. Clement, I saw you talking with Mr. Gray at the fete. It looked heated. Can you tell us what happened?" The vicar's hands shook as he lifted his head. "He was asking about the past," he said, his voice low. "Old stories about the vicarage, about a girl named Clara Weston who lived here years ago. He said he was writing a book, but I didn't trust him. He kept pushing, asking about a sapphire, some family treasure. I told him to leave it alone. Those stories are just village gossip, nothing more." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She remembered. Clara Weston, the heiress who vanished in 1905, leaving whispers of a hidden jewel. "And did he say why he cared so much about this sapphire?" she asked. Mr. Clement shook his head. He wouldn't say, just kept asking about the vicarage, the garden, the old well. "I lost my temper. I shouldn't have, but he was so pushy." His voice cracked, and he looked away. Staring at the fire, Miss Marple glanced at Mrs. Price, who stood by the door, her hands still twisting her apron. "Mrs. Price," she said softly, "did you hear Mr. Gray's questions? You were near the stall when he spoke to Mr. Clement." The housekeeper flinched, her eyes wide. I didn't hear much," she stammered. "Just bits. He was rude, that's all. Asking about things that don't matter anymore." Her voice was too quick, and Miss Marple noticed a bead of sweat on her forehead. People lied when they were scared, she knew, and Mrs. Price was scared of something. Inspector Craddock flipped a page in his notebook. "We found this in Gray's pocket," he said, holding up a small, leather-bound book. "It's got notes about Clara Weston, the sapphire, and some drawings of the vicarage garden. Looks like he was hunting for something specific." He passed the book to Miss Marple, who opened it carefully. The pages were filled with tight, messy handwriting. Words jumped out. Clara Weston, sapphire, vicarage, well, hidden, 1905. There was a sketch of the garden, with an X marked near the well. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. She'd seen that well before, overgrown with ivy, barely used now. Could something be hidden there? And why would Gray die for it? "Inspector," she said, handing the book back, "that key you found by the body, does it fit anything in the vicarage?" Craddock frowned. "We haven't checked yet. It's old, maybe for a lockbox or a gate. I'll have my men look around." He paused, then added, "Miss Eleanor, the young woman with Gray, says she barely knew him, met him in London, came here for the fete. But she's nervous, keeps looking at the door like she wants to run." Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing Miss Eleanor's forced smile at the fete. "Where is she now?" she asked. "At the Blue Boar Inn," Craddock said. "I've got a constable watching her. She's not going anywhere." "Good, Miss," Marple said. She turned to Mrs. Price, who was still hovering. "Mrs. Price, you've worked here a long time. Ever hear stories about Clara Weston or her sapphire?" The housekeeper's hands froze on her apron. "Just gossip," she said quickly. "My father used to talk about her. Said she was a rich girl who ran off. Nothing about a sapphire, though." Her eyes flicked to the floor, and Miss Marple knew she was hiding something. People always showed their lies in small ways: a look, a pause, a fidget. She thought of a story from her youth, about a maid who lied about stealing a brooch. The maid's hands gave her away, always touching her pocket where the brooch was hidden. Mrs. Price's hands were doing the same now, clutching her apron like it held a secret. Miss Marple made a mental note to watch her closely. Mr. Clement stood, his chair scraping the floor. "This is too much," he said, his voice breaking. "That letter opener was mine, but I didn't kill him. I was at the raffle when it happened. Ask anyone. He looked at Miss Marple, his eyes pleading. You believe me, don't you? I believe the truth will come out, she said calmly. It always does, Mr. Clement. She didn't say more, but her mind was busy. The letter opener was from the vicarage, so someone here knew something. Was it the vicar, upset by Gray's questions? Or Mrs. Price, with her nervous hands? Or maybe Miss Eleanor, who'd vanished when the body was found? Craddock tucked his notebook away. Miss Marple, I'm heading to the garden to check that well. Want to come along? She shook her head. Not just now, Inspector. I think I'll stay and have a word with Mrs. Price. But do look at that. Well, carefully. Old places like that hold secrets. She gave him a small smile, and he nodded, knowing her hunches were worth listening to. As Craddock left, Miss Marple turned to Mrs. Price. Would you make us some tea, dear? She asked, her voice kind but firm. And perhaps you could tell me more about your father's stories. He knew Clara Weston, didn't he? Mrs. Price's face went white, but she nodded and scurried to the kitchen. Mr. Clement sank back into his chair, staring at the fire. Miss Marple sat quietly, her eyes taking in the room. The study was tidy, except for the scattered papers on the desk. She noticed a photograph on the mantel, an old one of the vicarage from years ago. The well was in the background, clear as day, with a young woman standing nearby. Could that be Clara Weston? Mrs. Price returned with a tea tray, her hands shaking so much the cups rattled. Here's your tea, she said, setting it down. Miss Marple thanked her and sipped slowly, watching the housekeeper's every move. Your father, she said gently, he worked in the village, didn't he? Did he ever mention a sapphire? Mrs. Price's cup clattered against its saucer. No, she said, too fast. He didn't know anything about that. Just stories, like I said. She stood, smoothing her apron. I need to check the kitchen. Excuse me, she hurried out, leaving Miss Marple and the vicar alone. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Mrs. Price was scared, and scared people lied. She thought of Gray's notebook, the X on the well, and the rusty key. Then there was Miss Eleanor, who'd come with Gray but acted like she barely knew him. And Mr. Dunhill, the historian, who loved old stories. Did he know about Clara Weston's sapphire? She stood, her shawl slipping slightly. Mr. Clement, she said, I'll let you rest. But if you remember anything about Gray's questions, do tell me. Small things matter. He nodded, looking tired and lost. Miss Marple left the study, her steps slow but sure. The vicarage was quiet now, but secrets hummed in the air. She thought of Mr. Dunhill, who'd been at the fete. His face flushed when he saw Gray's body. He knew the village's history better than anyone. If anyone could shed light on Clara Weston and her sapphire, it was him. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her face. The vicarage garden was dark, but she could see Craddock's men near the well, their lanterns glowing. She didn't join them. Instead, she turned toward the village, her mind set on Mr. Dunhill's house. His study, full of old books and papers, might hold the next clue. With a small nod to herself, she started walking, her sharp eyes ready to unravel the shadows of the past. Chapter 3. The historian's secret. Miss Marple walked through the quiet streets of St. Mary Mead, her shawl wrapped tight against the chilly night air. The village was still, the fate's bright energy now just a memory. Lanterns flickered in. A few windows, but most houses were dark, their curtains drawn against the shock of Mr. Lionel Gray's murder. Her shoes clicked softly on the cobblestones as she headed toward Mr. Dunhill's house. A small cottage at the edge of the village, its windows glowing with warm light. She knew Mr. Dunhill, the local historian, loved his books and old stories. If anyone could help unravel the mystery of Clara Weston's sapphire, it was him. Her mind buzzed with the day's events. Gray's body in the vicarage garden, the letter opener in his chest, the notebook with its talk of a sapphire, and that rusty key found near the roses. Mrs. Price's nervous hands and Mr. Clemence's red face stuck in her thoughts, too. And then there was Miss Eleanor, the young woman with the fake smile, who'd vanished when the body was found. Miss Marple didn't trust people who disappeared at convenient times. She'd seen it before. Young man in St. Mary Mead once slipped away during a theft, thinking no one would notice. She'd noticed then, and she noticed now. She reached Mr. Dunhill's cottage and knocked. The door creaked open, and Mr. Dunhill's round face appeared, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Miss Marple," he said, surprised. "What brings you here so late? Come in, come in." He stepped aside, and she entered a cramped hallway stuffed with books and papers. The air smelled of ink and dust, like a library forgotten by time. "Thank you, Mr. Dunhill," she said, her voice gentle. But sharp, she followed him to his study, a room bursting with shelves, maps, and old photographs. A single lamp cast shadows on the walls, making the place feel like a cave of secrets. Mr. Dunhill cleared a chair of books and offered it to her. She sat, her eyes scanning the room. A pile of papers on his desk caught her attention. One sheet had a sketch of the vicarage well, just like the one in Gray's notebook. "I won't keep you long," Miss Marple said, folding her hands. "It's about Mr. Gray. I saw you at the fete, looking upset when his body was found. You knew he was asking about Clara Weston, didn't you?" Mr. Dunhill's face went pink, and he pushed his glasses up. "Well, yes," he said, fidgeting. "He came to me a few days ago, said he was writing a book about old villagers. Wanted to know about Clara Weston, the heiress who vanished in 1905, kept asking about her sapphire, said it was worth a fortune. I told him it was just a story, but he wouldn't let it go." Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing Gray's slick smile. "And what did you tell him?" she asked, her eyes fixed on his. Mr. Dunhill shifted in his chair. "Not much. Just what everyone knows. Clara was a rich girl, lived at the vicarage with her family. She disappeared one night, and folks said she ran off with a lover. The sapphire was her mother's, a big blue stone, passed down for years. Some say she hid it before she left, but no one's ever found it." He paused, then added, "Gray thought it was in the vicarage garden, near the well. He was obsessed." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. The well again. Gray's notebook had marked it with an X, and now Mr. Dunhill was talking about it, too. She glanced at the sketch on his desk. "That drawing," she said, pointing. "It's the vicarage well, isn't it? Did you show it to Gray?" Mr. Dunhill's face went redder. I might have," he stammered. "He kept pushing, said he'd pay me for information. I showed him some old maps, that's all. Nothing important." His hands fumbled with a pen, and Miss Marple knew he was hiding something. People always fidgeted when they felt guilty. She leaned forward, her voice soft. "Mr. Dunhill, a man is dead. If you know something, it's best to say it now. The truth has a way of coming out." He looked away, his eyes on the floor. "I didn't tell him everything," he said finally. "There's a story, an old one, about Clara hiding the sapphire in the well. My grandfather wrote it down in his diary. He was a gardener at the vicarage back then. Said he saw Clara near the well the night she vanished, carrying a small box. I told Gray the story, but not about the box. I didn't trust him. Miss Marple's mind raced. A box in the well could hold the sapphire, and maybe that rusty key fit it. She thought of Mrs. Price, whose father knew Clara. Could she be tied to this, too? "Did you ever find that box?" she asked. Mr. Dunhill shook his head. "No, the well's been sealed for years, too deep to check. I thought it was just a tale, but Gray, he believed it. He was poking around the vicarage before the fete, asking to see the garden. I told him to stay away." His voice grew sharp, and Miss Marple noticed a flash of anger in his eyes. She sat back, her thoughts spinning. Mr. Dunhill knew more than most, but was he telling the whole truth? She remembered a case years ago, when a shopkeeper hid a stolen ring because he wanted it for himself. Mr. Dunhill's flushed face and quick words made her wonder if he'd thought about that sapphire too. "Mr. Dunhill," she said, "did anyone else know about your grandfather's diary?" "Mrs. Price, perhaps. Her father worked in the village back then." He blinked, surprised. "Mrs. Price, I don't think so. Her father was a handyman, fixed things around the vicarage. He might have known Clara, but I never told Mrs. Price about the diary." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Just a thought. Small villages hold big secrets, you know." She stood, her shawl slipping slightly. "Thank you for your time. I'll let you get back to your books." As she turned to leave, her eyes caught something on a shelf, a torn photograph, old and faded. It showed a young woman with a locket around her neck, standing by the vicarage well. Next to her was a man, his face half ripped away. Miss Marple's heart skipped. The locket looked like one she'd seen in Mrs. Price's cottage years ago, when she'd visited for tea. "That's Clara Weston, isn't it?" she asked, pointing. Mr. Dunhill nodded, looking uneasy. "Yes, found it in my grandfather's things. Don't know who the man is. The photo was torn when I got it." Miss Marple filed that away. A locket, a torn photo, a man from the past. She thought of Mrs. Price's nervous hands, her quick denials about her father. Something connected them to Clara, she was sure. But what? She thanked Mr. Dunhill and stepped back into the night. The village was darker now, the stars bright above. Her mind turned over the clues. The sapphire, the well, the key, the locket. Mr. Dunhill's story about the box was new, and it made the well even more important. She wondered what Inspector Craddock had found there. Was the sapphire really hidden inside, or was it just a story to lure Gray to his death? As she walked, she thought of Miss Eleanor, who'd come with Gray but acted so strange, and Mrs. Price, whose father knew Clara. The housekeeper's fear was real, but was it guilt or something else? Miss Marple knew people hid things for all sorts of reasons: love, greed, shame. She'd seen it in St. Mary Mead before, like the time a farmer lied to protect his son from a theft charge. Mrs. Price's lies felt personal, tied to her past. She paused at the village square, the green now empty except for a few scattered fake posters. Mr. Dunhill's cottage was behind her, its lights still glowing. She didn't trust his story completely. He'd been too quick to dismiss the sapphire, too nervous about the well. But his grandfather's diary was a solid clue, and that torn photo was another. She needed to talk to Mrs. Price again, to ask about her father and that locket. Miss Marple turned toward Mrs. Price's cottage, just a short walk away. The housekeeper lived alone, in a small house near the church. If she knew about Clara Weston, or the sapphire, her nervous hands might give her away. Miss Marple's steps were slow but steady, her sharp eyes scanning the dark. The truth was out there, hiding in the shadows of St. Mary Mead's past. She'd find it. She always did. Chapter 4. The housekeeper's tale. Miss Marple walked through the dark streets of St. Mary Mead, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. The village was quiet, the fates' laughter long gone, replaced by whispers of murder. Her steps were slow but steady as she made her way to Mrs. Price's cottage, a small house tucked behind the church. The glow of a single lamp spilled from the window, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the flicker of a curtain. Mrs. Price was awake and likely nervous. Miss Marple knew nervous people often hid secrets, and she meant to find out what the housekeeper was keeping back. Her mind buzzed with the day's clues. Mr. Lionel Gray's body in the vicarage garden, stabbed with a letter opener. His notebook with its talk of a sapphire and the vicarage well. The rusty key found near the roses. And Mr. Dunhill's story about his grandfather's diary, which mentioned Clara Weston hiding a box in that well. Then there was the torn photograph in Dunhill's study, showing a young woman, likely Clara, with a locket and a man whose face was ripped away. Miss Marple remembered a locket like that in Mrs. Price's cottage years ago. Could the housekeeper's father, a handyman in Clara's time, be tied to this mystery? She reached the cottage and knocked softly. The door opened a crack, and Mrs. Price's pale face appeared, her eyes wide with worry. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice high and shaky. "It's late. Is something wrong?" "I just need a word, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice kind but firm. "May I come in?" Mrs. Price hesitated, then opened the door wider, letting Miss Marple into a small, tidy parlour. The room smelled of lavender and wax polish, but the air felt heavy, like it held secrets too big for the space. A fire crackled in the hearth, and on a small table sat a silver locket, its chain glinting in the lamplight. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. It was just like the one in Dunhill's photograph. "Would you like tea?" Mrs. Price asked, her hands twisting her apron again. She moved toward the kitchen, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "No need, dear. I won't stay long. I wanted to talk about Mr. Gray and those old stories about Clara Weston. You said your father knew her, didn't you?" Miss Marple sat in a creaky chair, her eyes never leaving the housekeeper's face. Mrs. Price froze, her hands clutching her apron so tight, her knuckles turned white. "My father," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He worked at the vicarage years ago, fixing things. He might have known Clara, but he never said much. Just that she was a nice girl who left town." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind sharp as ever. She'd seen people dodge questions before Baker once lied about selling spoiled bread, his eyes darting just like Mrs. Price's now. "Mr. Gray was asking about Clara's sapphire," she said. "He thought it was hidden in the vicarage well. Mr. Dunhill told me a story about Clara hiding a box there. Your father worked at the vicarage then. Did he ever mention a sapphire? Or a box?" Mrs. Price's face went paler, if that was possible. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "No," she said, too fast. "He didn't know anything about a sapphire. Just village gossip, that's all. People made up stories about Clara because she was rich. My father was just a handyman, not part of her world." Her eyes flicked to the locket on the table, then away, quick as a blink. Miss Marple's gaze followed. "That's a pretty locket," she said softly. It looks old. A family piece, perhaps. Mrs. Price's hand shot out, grabbing the locket and tucking it into her apron pocket. It's nothing, she said, her voice sharp. Just something. My mother left me. No value. But her cheeks flushed, and Miss Marple knew a lie when she saw one. The locket was important, maybe a link to Clara Weston herself. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. Mrs. Price, a man is dead. Mr. Gray was killed with the vicar's letter opener, and he was hunting that sapphire. If you know something, even a small thing, it could help. The truth always comes out, you know. Mrs. Price's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. I don't know anything, she said, her voice breaking. My father never talked. About Clara, not really. He said she was kind, that's all. He was sad when she left. But he didn't know about any sapphire, I swear. Her hands twisted her apron again, and Miss Marple saw the fear in her eyes. Not just fear of the murder, but something deeper, something old. Miss Marple sat back, her mind racing. She thought of a story from years ago, when a seamstress in St. Mary Mead hid a stolen necklace because it came from her sister's lover. Mrs. Price's fear felt like that, personal, tied to family. Could her father have been close to Clara? Close enough to know about the sapphire? And that locket, why was it in Dunhill's photograph? She glanced around the parlour, her sharp eyes catching small details. A faded photograph on the mantel, showing a young man who looked like Mrs. Price's father. A worn Bible with papers tucked inside. A basket of sewing by the fire, with a needle stuck in a cloth. Nothing screamed sapphire, but Miss Marple knew clues hid in plain sight. She'd solved a theft once by noticing a button in the wrong place. Small things mattered. Mrs. Price, she said, did you see Mr. Gray at the fete? You were near the vicarage stall when he argued with Mr. Clement. Did he say anything to you? The housekeeper's hands stopped twisting for a moment. He asked me about the well, she said slowly, said he heard it was special, part of the vicarage's history. I told him it was just an old well, nothing to see. He smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Made me feel cold. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Miss Marple nodded, filing that away. Gray had been sniffing around the well, just like Dunhill said, and Mrs. Price had been there, watching him. But was she hiding more? And Miss Eleanor? Miss Marple asked. She was with Gray at the fete. Did you know her? Mrs. Price shook her head quickly. No, never saw her before. She was all fancy, hanging on his arm. Didn't look like she belonged here. Her voice had an edge, and Miss Marple caught it. Jealousy, maybe, or just dislike. She remembered Miss Eleanor's forced smile, her quick exit when Gray's body was found. Something wasn't right there. A knock at the door made Mrs. Price jump. She hurried to answer it, and Miss Marple heard Inspector Craddock's voice. Miss Marple, you're here, he said, stepping into the parlour. His face was grim, his coat dusted with dirt. We checked the vicarage well. It's deep, but we found something, a metal box, rusted shut. That key might fit it. We're bringing it up tomorrow. Miss Marple's heart skipped. A box, just like Mr. Dunhill's grandfather wrote about. That's very interesting, Inspector, she said. Any sign of the sapphire? Not yet, he said, but we'll open it carefully. Could be important. He glanced at Mrs. Price, who was standing by the door, her face white. Mrs. Price, you worked at the vicarage a long time. Ever hear about a box in that well? No, she said, her voice sharp. Never. It's just an old well, like I told Mr. Gray. She turned away, busying herself with the tea tray. But Miss Marple saw her hands shake. Craddock raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. "Miss Marple, I'm off to the Blue Boar Inn to talk to Miss Eleanor. Want to come?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Not tonight, Inspector. I think I'll head to the village library tomorrow. Old records might tell us more about Clara Weston. And that sapphire." She stood, her shawl slipping slightly. "Mrs. Price, thank you for your time. If you remember anything about your father or that locket, do let me know." Mrs. Price nodded, her eyes on the floor. Miss Marple stepped outside, the night air cool on her face. Craddock walked with her a few steps, his lantern swinging. "You think she's hiding something?" he asked quietly. "I think everyone's hiding something," Miss Marple said with a small smile. "But the truth has a way of showing itself." She wished him good night and turned toward home, her mind on the library. Old records could hold answers about Clara, the sapphire, and maybe even Mrs. Price's father. As she walked, she thought of the locket, the box in the well, and Miss Eleanor's strange behavior. The pieces were starting to fit, like a scarf she was knitting. Pull one thread, and the pattern would show. She reached the village square, the church looming dark against the stars. The library was just beyond, its doors locked for the night. Tomorrow she'd find those records. For now, she headed home, her sharp eyes ready for the next clue. Chapter 5. The Sapphires. Trail. Miss Marple woke early, the morning sun slipping through her cottage curtains. St. Mary Mead was quiet, the village green empty after yesterday's fate and the shock of Mr. Lionel Gray's murder. She sipped her tea, her mind buzzing with clues. The letter opener in Gray's chest, his notebook with its talk of a sapphire, the rusty key, the locket in Mrs. Price's cottage, and Mr. Dunhill's story about a box hidden in the vicarage. Well, Inspector Craddock had found that box last night, rusted shut, and she wondered if it held Clara Weston's long-lost sapphire. Today, she'd visit the village library to dig into old records. Answers hid in dusty pages, she knew, just like they hid in people's nervous glances. She wrapped her shawl and stepped outside, her shoes tapping on the cobblestones. The library was a small building near the church, its stone walls covered in ivy. Miss Marple pushed open the heavy door, the smell of old books greeting her like an old friend. Miss Turner, the librarian, looked up from her desk, her glasses glinting. "Miss Marple, what brings you here so early?" she asked, her voice bright but curious. "I'm looking for records about Clara Weston," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "She lived at the vicarage around 1905. Anything you have, letters, diaries, even gossip, might help." Miss Turner's eyes widened. "Clara Weston, because of that awful business with Mr. Gray. Everyone's talking about it." She bustled to a shelf, pulling out a box of yellowed papers. "We've got some old vicarage records here. Let's see what we can find." Miss Marple sat at a wooden table, the box in front of her. She opened it carefully, her sharp eyes scanning. Faded handwriting. There were vicarage ledgers, lists of repairs, and notes about garden parties. Then she found it a thin diary, its cover worn, marked with the name Edward Price. Her heart skipped. Edward Price was Mrs. Price's father, the handyman who worked at the vicarage in Clara's time. She opened the diary, her fingers gentle on the brittle pages. The entries were short, written in a neat but simple hand. Most were about fixing fences or painting walls, but one page caught her eye. Dated July 1905. "Clara came to the well tonight." It read. "She was crying, said she had to hide something precious. I helped her lower a box into the well. She swore me to silence, said it was for her child. I don't know what to do. Miss Marple's breath caught. A child, Clara's child, and a box in the well, just like Mr. Dunhill's grandfather wrote about. She turned the page, hoping for more, but the next entries were about routine work. Then, near the end, another note. Clara's gone. They say she ran off, but I don't believe it. She wouldn't leave her locket behind. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind racing. The locket in Mrs. Price's cottage, the one in Dunhill's torn photograph, it was Clara's, and Edward Price knew her well enough to help her hide a box. Could Mrs. Price be Clara's child? Miss Turner hovered nearby, dusting a shelf. Find anything, Miss Marple? She asked, her voice curious. Something very interesting, Miss Marple said, closing the diary. Miss Turner, do you remember Mrs. Price's parents? Her father, Edward, worked at the vicarage. The librarian nodded, pushing her glasses up. Oh yes, Edward was a quiet man, kept to himself. His wife, Mary, died young when Mrs. Price was just a baby. Folks said Edward raised her alone, never talked much about the past. Why? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Just piecing things together. One more thing, did you see Miss Eleanor at the fete yesterday? The young woman with Mr. Gray? Miss Turner's face lit up with gossip. Oh, her. All fancy in that silk dress, clinging to Mr. Gray like he was a prince. But I saw her later, near the vicarage garden, just before the raffle. She was by the... well, looking sneaky. I thought she was up to no good, but then the raffle started, and I forgot about it. Miss Marple's heart jumped. Miss Eleanor, by the well, right before Gray's body was found. She remembered the young woman's forced smile, her quick disappearance after the murder. Thank you, Miss Turner, she said, standing. You've been most helpful. She tucked the diary under her arm, promising to return it soon, and stepped outside. The morning was bright, but a chill hung in the air, like the village was holding its breath. Her mind spun with new clues. Edward Price helping Clara hide a box, Clara's child, the locket, and Miss Eleanor sneaking near the... Well, she thought of a case years ago when a gardener's diary led her to a stolen ring hidden in a flower pot. Diaries told truths people wouldn't say out loud, and Edward's was no different. As she walked toward the village green, she saw Inspector Craddock coming from the vicarage, his face tired but alert. Miss Marple, he called, hurrying over. We opened that box from the well. It's empty, no sapphire, just some old cloth. But the key fit perfectly. Whoever hid it meant it to stay hidden. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on Clara's. Diary entry. Empty, you say? That's curious. Inspector, I've just found something in the library. Edward Price, Mrs. Price's father, helped Clara Weston hide that box in 1905. He wrote about her child. I think Mrs. Price might be Clara's daughter. Craddock's eyes widened. Her daughter. That would explain why she's so jumpy. But why kill Gray? Perhaps he found out, Miss Marple said. Or perhaps someone else did. Someone who wanted the sapphire for themselves. Like Miss Eleanor. The librarian saw her near the well before the murder. Craddock scribbled in his notebook. Miss Eleanor's at the Blue Boar Inn, still acting nervous. I'll question her again. But if the box is empty, where's the sapphire? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Sometimes, Inspector, things are hidden in plain sight. I think the sapphire is still in St. Mary Mead, and someone knows where. We need to watch carefully." She paused, then added, "Could you guard the vicarage?" "Well, tonight. If someone thinks the sapphire's still there, they might try to look." Craddock nodded, catching her meaning. "A trap. Good idea, Miss Marple. I'll have my men ready. Want to be there." "I'll come by later," she said. "For now, I need to think. The library gave me a start, but there's more to find." She didn't say it aloud, but she was thinking of Mrs. Price's locket. If it was Clara's, it might hold a clue, maybe even the sapphire itself. Tucked inside, she thanked Craddock and turned back toward the library, her steps slow but sure. The records had given her a piece of the puzzle, but she needed more maybe. A marriage record or a birth certificate to prove Mrs. Price was Clara's child. As she walked, she thought of Miss Eleanor sneaking by the well. Was she after the sapphire too? And Mr. Dunhill, with his grandfather's diary and torn photograph, had he told her everything? The village green was quiet, the fete stalls gone. Miss Marple pictured Clara Weston, a young woman desperate to hide her treasure, trusting Edward Price with her secret. She thought of Mrs. Price, her nervous hands clutching that locket, and Miss Eleanor, whose smile hid something darker. The sapphire was the key, she was sure, but who wanted it badly enough to kill? She reached the library door again, deciding to look for one last record before heading to the vicarage tonight. A marriage between Clara and Edward could explain everything: Mrs. Price's birth, the locket, even the murder. She'd seen cases like this before, where family secrets turned deadly. A shopkeeper once killed to keep his sister's past hidden. And Miss Marple had caught him by noticing a letter in the wrong drawer. Small things, always small things. As she stepped inside, Miss Turner looked up, surprised. "Back already?" she asked. "Just one more look," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but determined. She'd find the truth, she always did. But first, she'd set that trap at the well. Whoever wanted that sapphire would come looking, and she'd be there, watching from the shadows. Chapter 6. The trap at the well. Miss Marple left the village library as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over St. Mary Mead. The village was hushed, its streets empty after the shock of Mr. Lionel Gray's murder. Her mind buzzed with clues: the letter opener in Gray's chest, his notebook pointing to a sapphire, the rusty key, the locket in Mrs. Price's cottage, the empty box from the vicarage well, and Edward Price's diary hinting that Mrs. Price was Clara Weston's daughter. Miss Turner's gossip about Miss Eleanor sneaking near the well before the murder had sealed Miss Marple's plan. Tonight, she'd set a trap to catch the killer, and the vicarage garden was the perfect place. She walked slowly, her shawl tight against the evening chill. The vicarage loomed ahead, its stone walls dark under the starry sky. Inspector Craddock had agreed to guard the well where the empty box was found, hoping to lure whoever was after the sapphire. Miss Marple's sharp eyes had pieced it together. Gray was killed for what he knew, and someone else in St. Mary Mead wanted that jewel. Was it Miss Eleanor, with her fake smile? Mrs. Price, hiding her past? Or even Mr. Dunhill, with his old diaries and nervous glances? She reached the vicarage gate, her steps quiet on the gravel. Craddock was waiting, his lantern dim to avoid notice. "Miss Marple," he whispered, "my men are hidden behind the hedges. The well's in sight. If anyone comes, we'll see them." "Good," she said softly, her eyes scanning the garden. The well sat in a corner, its stone rim covered in ivy, looking harmless but heavy with secrets. She thought of Edward Price's diary, Clara hiding a box there for her child. The box was empty now, But Miss Marple suspected the sapphire was still close, maybe hidden in plain sight, like the locket Mrs. Price clutched so tightly they crouched behind a rose bush, the air thick with the scent of flowers and damp earth. Miss Marple's knees ached, but she stayed still, her ears sharp for any sound. She'd done this before, waiting in the dark to catch a thief who thought he'd outsmarted her. People got careless when they felt safe, and she was counting on that tonight. Minutes passed, then an hour. The village clock chimed 10, its sound faint in the distance. Then came a rustle, soft but clear, from the garden gate. Miss Marple's heart jumped. A figure slipped through, moving fast toward the well. The lantern light caught a glimpse of a silk dress and dark curls. Miss Eleanor. She carried a small shovel, her steps sneaky but sure. Craddock tensed, ready to move, but Miss Marple touched his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let her show us what she's after." Eleanor knelt by the well, her shovel scraping at the dirt near the base. She was digging, her movements quick and desperate. Miss Marple's mind raced. Was the sapphire buried there, not in the box? Or was Eleanor chasing a false trail? Eleanor stopped, pulling a small metal case from the earth. It was smaller than the box Craddock found, but just as rusty. She fumbled with it, muttering under her breath. Miss Marple caught the words sapphire and grey. Craddock gave a nod, and two constables stepped out, their lanterns blazing. "Miss Eleanor," Craddock called. "Step away from the well." Eleanor gasped, dropping the case. It hit the ground with a dull thud, and she tried to run, but the constables blocked her path. "I didn't do anything," she cried, her voice high and panicked. Her silk dress was streaked with dirt, and her face was pale in the lantern light. Miss Marple stood, brushing off her skirt. "Miss Eleanor," she said calmly, "you were seen near the well before Mr. Gray was killed, and now you're here, digging up secrets. Care to explain?" Eleanor's eyes darted, looking for a way out, but the constables stood firm. She slumped, her shoulders shaking. "All right," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll tell you. Gray and I were partners. We heard about Clara Weston's sapphire, hidden in St. Mary Mead. He found old letters in London, saying it was in the vicarage well. We came to the fate to find it." Craddock picked up the metal case, prying it open. Inside was a velvet pouch, and inside that, a blue stone that sparkled even in the dim light. The sapphire. Miss Marple's heart gave a little leap. "So you found it," she said. "But why kill Mr. Gray?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "He got greedy," she said. "We agreed to split the sapphire's value, but he wanted it all at the fete. He said he'd tell everyone I was a thief, unless I gave him my share. I followed him to the garden, grabbed the letter opener from the vicar's study, and I didn't mean to kill him, but he kept shouting, and I panicked." She covered her face, sobbing. Miss Marple nodded, her face calm but sad. She'd seen greed turn people to murder before. A farmer once killed his brother over a plot of land, thinking no one would suspect. But small things always gave them away. Like Eleanor's sneaky trip to the well, Craddock handed the sapphire to a constable, who bagged it carefully. "Miss Eleanor, you're under arrest," he said, his voice firm. "Will need a full statement." He turned to Miss Marple. "Good work, Miss Marple. Your trap worked." She smiled faintly. "It was the well, Inspector. It drew them all, Gray, Eleanor, even Clara, years ago. But there's one more piece. This sapphire belongs to someone." She thought of Mrs. Price, Clara's daughter, whose locket tied her to the past. Craddock frowned. "You mean Mrs. Price? You think she's really Clara's child? I do, Miss Marple said. Edward Price's diary said Clara hid the sapphire for her child. Mrs. Price's locket matches the one in Clara's photograph, and her father raised her alone after Clara vanished. I believe Clara left the sapphire for her daughter, and it's only right it goes to her now. Craddock nodded, scribbling in his notebook. We'll check the records, but it makes sense. Poor Mrs. Price, she's been a wreck since the murder. Miss Marple's eyes softened. She's scared because her past is tangled in this. She didn't kill Gray, but she knew more than she said. Let's talk to her tomorrow, Inspector. Gently, the constables led Eleanor away, her sobs echoing in the quiet garden. Miss Marple stayed a moment, looking at the well. It was just a pile of stones now, but it had held St. Mary Mead's secrets for years. She thought of Clara Weston, desperate to protect her child, hiding her treasure in the dark, and Gray, whose greed brought him to his end. People never changed. She knew greed, fear, love. They always led to the truth. Craddock walked her to the garden gate. You're a wonder, Miss Marple, he said. How'd you know Eleanor would come? People chase what they want most, she said. Eleanor wanted that sapphire, and she thought the well still held it. She didn't. No, the box we found was empty. She paused, then added, Tomorrow, let's give Mrs. Price the sapphire. It's hers by right. He nodded, tipping his hat. I'll see to it. Get some rest, Miss Marple. You've earned it. She smiled and turned toward home, her steps slow but steady. The village was dark, the stars bright above. As she passed the green, she saw the last of the Fates decorations being cleared away, a torn banner, a forgotten balloon. It felt like yesterday's chaos was fading, but the truth had left its mark. Mrs. Price would have her mother's sapphire, and Eleanor would face justice. St. Mary Mead would heal, as it always did. Miss Marple reached her cottage, the familiar sight of her lace curtains warming her heart. She'd sit by her window tomorrow, knitting and thinking, ready to tell her nephew Raymond about the case. But for now, she needed sleep. The mystery was solved, the sapphire found, and the truth laid bare. She opened her door, the quiet of her home wrapping around her like a shawl, and stepped inside, ready for a new day. Chapter 7. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple stepped into her cottage, the familiar creak of the door welcoming her home. The night was quiet, the stars bright over St. Mary Mead, and the village felt calm again, like a storm had passed. She hung her shawl on the hook and lit a small lamp, its soft glow filling the parlour with warmth. Her knitting lay on the armchair by the window, just where she'd left it before the fate turned the village upside down. She smiled faintly, thinking how quickly a sunny day had turned to murder, and how her sharp eyes had unravelled it all. She settled into her chair, the lace curtains framing the village green outside. It was empty now, the Fates stalls and banners gone, swept away like the secrets that had haunted St. Mary Mead. Her mind wandered over the case, Mr. Lionel Gray's body in the vicarage garden, stabbed with a letter opener, his notebook with its talk of Clara Weston's sapphire, the rusty key, the locket in Mrs. Price's cottage, the empty box in the well, and Edward Price's diary, hinting that Mrs. Price was Clara's daughter. Last night's trap had caught Miss Eleanor, who confessed to killing Gray in a panic over the sapphire's riches. The jewel was safe now, ready to be given to Mrs. Price. Its rightful owner, Miss Marple, picked up her knitting, her needles clicking softly. The rhythm soothed her, letting her thoughts settle. She'd seen greed turn people to terrible things. Before Baker once stole from his own sister, thinking no one would notice, but small things always gave them away, like Eleanor's sneaky trip to the well or Mrs. Price's nervous hands clutching that locket. People couldn't hide their hearts, not from someone who watched as closely as she did. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and opened it to find her nephew, Raymond West, his face bright with curiosity. "Aunt Jane," he said, stepping inside, "the whole village is buzzing about the murder. They say you solved it, as usual. Tell me everything." She smiled, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down, Raymond. I'll make tea, and we'll talk." She moved to the kitchen, her steps slow but steady, and set the kettle on. As the water boiled, she thought of the fate just 2 days ago, when she'd watched Gray from this very window, his slick smile hiding his greed. It felt like a lifetime had passed. Back in the parlor, she poured tea and handed Raymond a cup. "It started at the fete," she said, settling into her chair. Mr. Gray was a stranger, asking too many questions about Clara Weston, a girl who vanished in 1905 with a valuable sapphire. He argued with Mr. Clement, the vicar, and I saw trouble coming. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes wide. "And then he was killed, right? Stabbed in the garden?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm, "with Mr. Clement's letter opener. I went to the vicarage to ask questions. Mrs. Price, the housekeeper, was nervous, and Mr. Clement was shaken. Gray's notebook mentioned a sapphire hidden in the vicarage well, and I found a rusty key near his body. It pointed to something old, something hidden." She sipped her tea, her needles clicking again. "Mr. Dunhill, the historian, told me about his grandfather's diary, which said Clara hid a box in the well. Then, at the library, I found Edward Price's diary, Mrs. Price's father. He wrote about helping Clara hide that box for her child. I began to think Mrs. Price was Clara's daughter." Raymond's mouth dropped open. "Her daughter? That's wild. But who killed Gray?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Patience, Raymond. I visited Mrs. Price's cottage and saw a locket, just like one in an old photograph of Clara. Mrs. Price was scared, hiding something about her father. Meanwhile, Miss Eleanor, who came with Gray, was acting strange. The librarian saw her sneaking by the well before the murder." She paused, letting the story sink in. "Inspector Craddock found an empty box in the well, locked with that rusty key. I thought the sapphire was gone, but I set a trap. Last night, we watched the well, and Miss Eleanor came, digging for another box. She found it with the sapphire inside. Raymond leaned closer, and she killed Gray." "Yes," Miss Marple said. She confessed. She and Gray were partners, hunting the sapphire. He got greedy, demanded it all, and she stabbed him in a panic. The sapphire's safe now, and it belongs to Mrs. Price, Clara's daughter. Justice is done." Raymond shook his head, amazed. "Aunt Jane, you're incredible. How do you figure it all out?" She smiled, her needles pausing. "People are like my knitting, Raymond. Pull one thread, and the pattern shows. Greed, fear, love, they make people act in ways that give them away. Mrs. Price's nervous hands, Eleanor's fake smile, Dunhill's quick excuses, they all told a story." She looked out the window, the green peaceful under the morning sun. "St. Mary Mead looks quiet, but it holds secrets. I watch from this window, and I see the truth in small things: a look, a word, a locket. It's always the small things." Raymond grinned. "You should write a book, Aunt Jane. You'd outsell." My novels. She laughed softly. Oh, I'm too old for that. But I'll keep knitting and watching. The village always has another story to tell. They sipped their tea, the parlour warm and cosy. Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Price, who'd get the sapphire. Today she'd be shocked, maybe tearful, to learn she was Clara's daughter. The locket, the diary, the well-daid all led to the truth, and now Mrs. Price could claim her mother's legacy. It wasn't just about the jewel, Miss Marple knew. It was about family, about healing old wounds. She glanced at the green, again picturing the fate, children running, stalls bright with jams and scarves, Gray's slick smile as he stirred up trouble. It had started here, from her window, and now it ended here, with the village at peace. She'd seen it perform. Theft, secret soul, unravelled by her quiet watching. People thought St. Mary Mead was sleepy, but she knew better. Human nature was the same everywhere, full of wants and mistakes. Will you tell Mrs. Price yourself? Raymond asked, finishing his tea. Inspector Craddock will handle it, she said. I'll visit her later to see how she's doing. She's carried a heavy secret, not even knowing it. The sapphire will help, but the truth matters more. Raymond stood, stretching. I'm off to London tomorrow, but I'll be back soon. Don't solve another murder without me. She chuckled. I'll try, dear. Safe travels. She saw him to the door, the morning light bright on the cobblestones. As he walked away, she returned to her chair, picking up her knitting. The needles clicked, steady and sure, like the beat of her thoughts. Outside, a bird sang, and a breeze rustled the curtains. Miss Marple looked at the green, now just grass and sunlight, no trace of the fate's chaos. She thought of Clara Weston, hiding her sapphire for a daughter she'd never see grow up, of Gray, whose greed cost him his life, of Eleanor, caught by her own desperation, and of Mrs. Price, whose nervous hands could finally rest. The village would talk about this for weeks, she knew. They'd whisper about the sapphire, the murder, the trap at the well. But they'd move on, as they always did. St. Mary Mead was strong that way, holding its secrets, but never breaking. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster, her scarf growing longer. She felt content, the mystery solved, the truth laid bare. As she knitted, she thought of a case years ago, when a postman's lie unravelled a theft because he'd worn the wrong boots. Small things, always small things. They told the story if you knew where to look. She sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and watched the green. The village was quiet, but she'd be ready when the next secret stirred. For now, she'd knit and watch and let St. Mary Mead breathe.